The oppressive lace of her wedding gown felt like a shroud. Elara didn't belong in the bustling, sun-baked streets of dusty Redemption Creek, nor in the opulent, if slightly threadbare, parlor where she was to become Mrs. Alistair Finch. Her father, Sheriff Beaumont, had arranged it all, a strategic alliance, he called it, between his modest law enforcement and Finch's vast, if ill-gotten, land holdings. But Elara's heart, a wild, untamed thing, rebelled. It yearned for the whispering wind of the open plains, not the stifling conformity of a respectable marriage to a man whose eyes held a predatory glint she despised. Just as the first notes of the wedding march began to swell from the saloon's battered piano, Elara bolted. Skirts rustling like dry leaves, she fled through the back door, ignoring the shocked gasps, the shouts of her name, and the clatter of hastily pursued footsteps. She tore through the alley, the delicate satin slippers soon shredded by sharp gravel until she reached the stables. Her father's prize mare, Willow, a spirited dun, whinnied softly as Elara fumbled with the saddle. With a surge of adrenaline, she threw herself onto the horse's back, a white phantom against the ruddy dust, and spurred Willow out of the town, not looking back. Her destination was nowhere, just away. The sun beat down relentlessly as Elara rode, the white gown quickly stained with dust and sweat. Panic, raw and biting, began to set in as the familiar landmarks of Redemption Creek vanished behind her. She had fled without provisions, without a plan. Willow, though strong, was tiring. The vast, indifferent expanse of the frontier stretched before her, a daunting canvas of sagebrush and distant, jagged mountains. As twilight bled purple and orange across the sky, a chilling wind whipped up, and Elara knew she was truly lost. Despair, cold and heavy, settled in her chest. Then through the deepening gloom she saw it, a wisp of smoke, thin and ethereal, rising from a small, secluded valley. Hope, fragile but persistent, flared. Guiding the weary Willow, she descended into the valley, finding a small, expertly maintained campsite. A lean, broad-shouldered man sat by a crackling fire, silhouetted against the dying light, tending a pot of stew. His rifle lay within easy reach. Caleb Thorne watched her approach, his hand instinctively going to the worn leather of his holster. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, narrowed in assessment. He'd seen desperate things on the frontier, but never a woman, barely more than a girl, in a tattered wedding dress, riding a fine mare like a banshee. "Evenin'," he drawled, his voice low and gravelly, betraying no surprise. "Lost, I reckon?" Elara slid from Willow's back, her legs shaky, her pride warring with her overwhelming relief. "More than you know," she managed, her voice hoarse. "My name is Elara Beaumont." She omitted the sheriff's daughter part. Caleb merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in the expensive fabric, the desperation in her wide, intelligent eyes. "Caleb Thorne, you got a name for that mare?" "Willow. Willow and Elara," he repeated almost to himself. "You're a long way from home, Elara." He gestured to the fire. "Stew's ready. You look like you could use some." His brusque offer was tempered by an underlying current of quiet compassion. Elara found herself sitting across from him, greedily eating the surprisingly flavorful stew. She felt safe for the first time since she'd fled, in the unassuming competence of this solitary man. But the silence, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote, was heavy with unspoken questions. The next few days were a tense dance of unspoken questions and shared necessities. Caleb, a man of few words, offered Elara shelter in a lean-to he quickly constructed, and taught her the basics of wilderness survival, how to build a proper fire, identify edible plants, and track game. Elara, initially indignant at her helplessness, soon found a fierce determination within herself. She learned quickly, absorbing his quiet lessons, her delicate hands toughening with work. One evening, as a sudden, torrential downpour forced them to huddle under a makeshift tarp, the dam of Elara's composure broke. The relentless rain seemed to wash away her carefully constructed defenses. She confessed everything: the arranged marriage, Finch's sinister nature, her father's rigid expectations, her desperate flight. Caleb listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on the drumming rain. When she finished, breathless and ashamed, he finally spoke. "Sometimes," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "running's the only way to find where you truly belong." He didn't offer sympathy but understanding, a rare and precious thing. In that shared vulnerability, a fragile truce began to form, a bridge built of mutual respect. He never judged, only observed, and Elara, for her part, began to see past his gruff exterior to the profound loneliness that etched lines around his eyes. Their uneasy alliance was tested when two rough-looking men, former associates of Alistair Finch, stumbled upon their camp. They were looking for Elara, intent on bringing her back to collect a bounty Finch had undoubtedly placed on her. Caleb, without a word, stepped between Elara and the intruders. His quiet demeanor vanished, replaced by a steely resolve that radiated danger. A tense standoff ensued, with Caleb's hand hovering near his holster, his eyes fixed on the men. He spoke, his voice dangerously low. "She ain't going nowhere with you." The men, sensing the lethality in him, eventually backed down, grumbling threats as they rode off. After they left, the silence was deafening. Elara stared at Caleb, a new fear mixing with a profound gratitude. "Who are you?" she whispered. He averted his gaze, stoking the fire. Later that night, under the vast star-strewn sky, Caleb finally shared a fragment of his own past, a brutal raid on his family's homestead years ago, leaving him the sole survivor. The event had forged his self-reliance and his aversion to emotional ties. "Too much to lose," he muttered, his voice raw. But in sharing this deep wound, he unconsciously offered Elara a piece of his guarded heart, and her trust in him deepened irrevocably. She saw the pain he carried and understood why he lived so alone. As days turned into weeks, Elara found a strange contentment in the harsh beauty of the wilderness and the quiet companionship of Caleb. She learned to ride like a true frontierswoman, shoot a rifle with accuracy, and track small game. Her wedding gown had been repurposed into practical garments, symbolizing her shedding of her old life. She began to envision a future not beholden to anyone, a life of independence and purpose. Caleb, too, seemed to soften, his rare smiles lighting up his eyes, his movements less guarded around her. He found himself looking forward to her questions and her surprising laughter. The climax arrived in the form of Sheriff Beaumont and Alistair Finch himself, who had tracked them down. The morning was clear and crisp, but the air was thick with tension. Finch, a sneer on his face, pulled a handgun. "Hand her over, Thorne. This doesn't concern you." The sheriff, though conflicted, held his rifle leveled. Caleb stepped in front of Elara. "It does now," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She's not a prize to be won. She's a person." The confrontation escalated into a furious gunfight. Caleb, a marksman of formidable skill, disarmed Finch with a precise shot to his hand. But the sheriff, torn between his duty and his daughter's well-being, fired his rifle, the bullet narrowly missing Caleb and lodging in the dirt behind him. Seeing her father's conflicted expression, Elara cried out, "Papa, he's not the man you think he is. He saved me." The sheriff's hand trembled, his resolve wavering. He saw the genuine care in Caleb's eyes, the love that had bloomed between the two, and the desperation in his daughter's plea. He saw that Elara was no longer a child to be sold, but a woman with a mind of her own. In that moment of decision, he made a choice that defied his position and his pride. He lowered his rifle. "Finch," he barked, "you're under arrest for attempted murder." Finch, bleeding and furious, could only watch as the sheriff, with a single regretful glance at his daughter, tied him up. He had lost. The resolution unfolded as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of red and gold. The sheriff rode away with Finch in tow, leaving Elara and Caleb alone in the quiet valley. The silence this time was not heavy but full of promise. Caleb turned to Elara, his eyes shining with an emotion she had never seen before. "You're free now, Elara." "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "And I choose to stay." He reached for her and she stepped into his arms, the worn denim and rough leather a more comforting embrace than any silk and lace. "You were meant to be found," Caleb murmured, his lips brushing her forehead. "No," she said, pulling back to look into his eyes, a radiant smile on her face. "I was meant to be lost so that I could find myself with you." The quiet valley became their home, a testament to the love that had grown from desperation and defiance. They built their life together on a foundation of trust and respect, their hearts no longer haunted by the past, but filled with the promise of a future forged on their own terms. The woman who ran from her wedding had not only escaped her past, but had found a love more profound and a freedom more complete than she had ever dared to dream.